Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to give you a very warm welcome to this side event. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Elisabeth Hammer. I'm a social scientist and a social worker, and I'm chairwoman of BAVO. This is an Austrian civil society organization working on combating homelessness. I have the honor to lead you through today's event. First of all, I'd like to thank the Permanent Representation of Austria to the United Nations for organizing this side event on this very timely and important topic. Special thanks go, of course, to our speakers. We are very happy to have you. I'm sure we all can benefit from sharing experiences from various contexts and reflect together on how to end homelessness, how to eradicate poverty, and how to provide affordable housing. You as the audience, you're very welcome to come in and take part in a Q&A session later on. I may now welcome Minister Rauch, Federal Minister of Social Affairs, Health, Care and Consumer Protection of Austria, to give his welcoming words. Minister Rauch is a qualified social worker by profession. He has worked in various positions related to social work and employing during his career. He has been engaged with the Green Party as member of the government of the Austrian federal state for Adelberg and has been serving as minister since 2022. Dear Minister, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this side event on ending homelessness hosted by my ministry. I am addressing you today as a minister and as a former social worker, thanks to my first-hand experience of working with people affected by poverty and homelessness. I am convinced that SDG 1 and 11, poverty eradication and affordable housing, must go hand in hand. Today we will approach this matter from different angles. Thanks to our esteemed panelists. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for accepting our invitation. I hope that this event will inspire new perspectives, encourage the exchange of innovative ideas, and foster collaboration. Before we kick off the debate, let me give you a brief overview of the current situation in Austria and the policy measures. Austria is, as you know, a relatively small country in Central Europe with a population of 9 million people. It is a stable and wealthy country, and yet in the past years we have experienced multiple crises impacting our economy and reinforcing each other. In particular, the war of aggression against Ukraine, which followed on the foot of the COVID-19 pandemic. Prices for energy, food, and housing have risen very fast, with inflation hitting a record high of 10%. This is causing challenges for many people and particular hardship for those with low incomes. If you don't have much, it's hard to make ends meet anywhere, also in Austria. In 2023, 41% of people with low household incomes saw housing costs as a considerable financial burden. 19% expected to have payment difficulties with housing or energy costs in the coming 3 months. In 2022, 20,000 people were counted as homeless in Austria, and there is a high number of unreported cases. For me, as Minister of Social Affairs, this is unacceptable. Housing is a human right. It is an essential prerequisite for social participation. Homeless people experience one of the worst forms of poverty and social exclusion. So how did the Austrian government, how did I respond to this situation? Our approach is twofold. First, prevention, where possible, and second, housing first, where needed. As so many people in our country were struggling to cover their rent and energy bills, we launched a federal eviction prevention program. We chose this approach because the costs of prevention are significantly lower than the costs of eviction and homelessness. People in need can apply for financial support to pay their rent, to cover the costs of moving to a more affordable apartment, and to cover their energy bills. Applications are handled by social counseling centers, which means that people in need not only receive financial help, but their case is also handled by a qualified social worker. Until today, we have supported about 17,000 persons, many of them women and children. Application numbers are still rising. We are lucky to have a budget of more than 160 million euros for this program. To support those citizens who have unfortunately lost their homes, we have scaled up our Housing First program. The guiding principle is that ending homelessness starts with housing. Today's moderator, Elisabeth Hammer, will give you more insights into this approach. My ministry has managed to transform this successful pilot project into a permanent program by enshrining it into law. And it's very important to give it a law frame. I'm looking forward to your presentation, Elisabeth, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for your statement. For the next couple of minutes, thank you so much. Thank you. For the next couple of minutes, I may now switch from my role as a moderator to my role as chairwoman of BAVO, the Austrian umbrella organization of social services provided for people affected by homelessness. It's quite an honor for me to represent a civil society's perspective here at the UN. I will introduce you to an initiative which tackles homelessness from the perspective of poverty eradication through housing inclusion. The project's goal is already in its name, Housing First Austria, Arriving Home. We provide people affected by homelessness with direct access to a new home of their own. Our target group encompasses people at risk of poverty according to income statistics who are experiencing homelessness or are at imminent risk thereof. The initiative overcomes an outdated staircase model. So I have to, so it's this slide here. The initiative overcomes an outdated staircase model and operates according to the Housing First approach. To those unfamiliar, Housing First means people affected by homelessness get direct access to their new home with their own rental contract. They are accompanied by social workers, needs-based and without coercion. Thus, the project approaches homelessness through the lens of housing as a human right. This way, over 1,100 people have already moved into the new apartments since we started the initiative back in 2021. And another 1,000 people are set to follow until September 2024. The project has specifically reached women and mothers in hidden homelessness. Almost 2/3 of adult beneficiaries are women. When applied at a large scale, I'm convinced that this model has the potential to end homelessness permanently. Why is that? Housing First Austria is a multi-stakeholder alliance. We at BAVO are the initiators and coordinators of the project. We represent the social service sector and civil society. The project is fully funded and supported by the Austrian Federal Ministry of Social Affairs with a total of 11.8 million euros. This national level action on homelessness and housing by the ministry is key, and it's new to the Austrian context. By starting this nationwide project, the ministry is taking an important step in streamlining policies on homelessness with a focus on housing first and with access to affordable housing for most vulnerable groups being now on the national agenda. Traditionally, action on homelessness might stop here. The social service sector collaborating with decision makers on this supposedly social issue. In our case, we did things differently. Housing First Austria works in close collaboration with Austria's large sector of limited profit housing associations. Here at the slide, you see Klaus Baringer alongside the minister and myself. He's representing this stakeholder, being its chairman. With this sector as a committed partner in ending homelessness, we ensure that affordable housing is accessible where needed. So Housing First Austria is building bridges between the social sector and housing and establishes quite an elaborated network at the regional as well as the national level. The broad coalition of 25 social organizations and more than 70 limited profit housing associations can only be sustained because of a shared vision of Housing First and a common understanding of how to put this vision into practice. For example, this brochure here is written for stakeholders in the field of housing as well as in the social sector, and this is one means to foster common knowledge of ending homelessness within this special stakeholder alliance. The way I see it, Housing First Austria has a systemic impact on housing as it makes housing markets more inclusive. Let me explain. Limited profit housing associations provide homes at affordable monthly rents, but they often require future tenants to pay upfront costs up to 5 figures. These costs represent a huge hurdle for people affected by poverty. Same goes for deposits and moving costs. Via Housing First Austria, all these entry costs can be covered by the project budgets. And also thanks to the funding, we are able to pay for social workers who accompany people on their way to a new home. This helps to counteract potential discrimination on the housing market and ensure stable tenancy. In doing so, we make affordable housing accessible to those who need it most. For a long time in Austria, we have approached homelessness the wrong way around, but now we know better. It's not the job of social service organizations to make people experiencing homelessness fit for housing. It's the job of politics and housing providers to level the playing field and make housing accessible for everyone. In Austria, 20,000 people being registered as homeless and up to 20,000 more suffering from hidden homelessness could profit from our continuing effort to establish housing for all. May we bear in mind these figures in our daily political work. Thank you. We now move on. We stay at the national level, but switch to a different continent, to a different country, namely Uganda. I have now the honor to give the floor to Madame Amongi, Minister for Gender, Labor and Social Development in Uganda. She previously served as the Minister of Kampala, capital city. Before that, she was Minister of Lands, Housing and Urban Development of Uganda. Minister Amongi, we are keen to get some insights. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Minister from Austria, the moderator and the panelists. Madam Chair, I have the honor to share with you Uganda's experience related to measures and policies to address the challenges of homelessness. Uganda appreciates discussing the topic ending homelessness, SDG 1 and SDG 2, how to eradicate poverty and provide adequate, safe and affordable housing. The Constitution of the Republic of Uganda and the national objectives and directive principles of state policy obligates government to ensure that all citizens enjoy rights and opportunities to access education, health services, clean and safe water, work, decent shelter, adequate clothing, food security, pension, and retirement benefits. We note that there is still an acute shortage of adequate, secure, and affordable urban housing in the Global South, a crisis that is projected to affect 1.6 billion people by 2025, according to a report from the World Resources Institute. Key challenges to providing adequate, secure, and affordable housing in the Global South includes the growth of informal or substandard settlements, which are called slums. The overemphasis on home ownership due to the complex legal regimes of land ownership, and inappropriate policies or laws that push the poor out of the cities. Uganda, just as many countries in the Global South, is faced with informal settlements with huge slums across the urban settings. These slums are mostly constructed on land not owned by government, and policies by government to relocate the population and plan such areas are usually met with resistance. We have thus adopted a policy of upgrading such informal settlements through promoting low-cost financing for landowners to improve the housing in the slums. We have also encouraged public-private partnerships to construct low-cost housing for sale at affordable rates to allow the poor access affordable housing. Our government-owned construction company called National Housing and Construction Company Limited is leading in this effort. We have also constructed housing for key civil servants like the doctors, nurses, police, the army, teachers. This enables them to have decent housing and close proximity to their workplace within the city. We have improved our legal regimes to promote investments on real estate housing development with defined legal regimes related to landlords and tenants, which spells out rights of tenants renting premises, and these are areas which always affect many poor people. The procedures for evictions is very well stipulated in the law. Prohibition to unfair rental increase. When you do a contract, there is an obligation for at least 2 years before you can increase, or if you are to increase, you give 6-month notice before the person chooses whether to continue with you or to leave the house. The legal regimes have promoted low-cost investment in housing for the poor, enabling them to have affordable rental homes within or near the cities and urban areas. We recognize that addressing poverty and access to financing is key to addressing decent shelter. We have therefore capitalized savings and cooperative housing associations. We have asked majority to be in association because they cannot afford. So we capitalize their housing associations, like for teachers, for the army, police, and all types of workers, and provide lending to those institutions as government at a very cheap rate of not beyond 6% per year. Majority of civil servants and urban dwellers are now using this model to borrow and construct their own homes and apartments, or to purchase low-cost apartments. This is acting as a catalyst to affordable housing. We also have a policy for subsidized construction materials for housing for the police and the army. The government, through urban authorities, also constructed houses for low-cost households at subsidized rates under the social housing program, where somebody can get mortgage. We have a mortgage national bank that you can borrow the mortgage over up to 20 years and invest in the social housing program that government undertakes. This is done through our Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development, which is charged with the provision of safe, accessible, adequate, and quality housing to all our citizens without discrimination. In 2016, we passed the National Housing Policy, and one of the objectives is to enable vulnerable groups to access adequate housing. A draft National Housing Policy Implementation Action Plan has been developed to guide the implementation of the National Housing Policy. Our National Development Plan prioritizes housing through an ambitious plan to capitalize the National Housing Construction Company and the National Finance Bank to provide low-cost housing and affordable mortgages. There is also strategy to incentivize the private sector to develop low-cost housing to reduce the housing deficit. We are also developing social infrastructure around social and housing estates. In conclusion, our government, through its policy, planning framework, and legislation, is committed to dealing with the challenge of homelessness and making the right to housing a reality through tackling poverty as a root cause, interventions in financing for cheap housing and mortgages, and reforming legal regimes to support slum upgrades. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Amongi. Thank you for shedding light to the challenges you face in Uganda. I'm quite impressed by the diverse and impressive efforts you undertake to improve the situation of affordable housing. Thank you. We have now the honor to welcome Mr. Rajagopal. He has been serving as UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing since 2020. He is Professor of Law and Development at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A lawyer by training, he is an expert on many areas of human rights, including economic, social and cultural rights, and human rights challenges. I'm now inviting Minister Rajagopal to give your statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not yet a minister, but thank you anyway. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really honored to be here, and it's a very important gathering that I deeply am grateful to the Austrian delegation for organizing. Homelessness has long been a major focus of the right to housing mandate, and it has only increased in seriousness and gravity over the years, unfortunately. The numbers are everywhere for us to see. In the United States, for example, the latest figures show more than 500,000 people who are unhoused, even going with the very conservative estimates. The United States doesn't adopt the ethos light definition, for example, from Europe, but even according to that, at least 500,000 people are homeless. And the tragedy is that 40% of them are African Americans, who constitute only 12% of the population, which is a serious problem of kind of a racial targeting or segregation, which I've repeatedly condemned. The numbers in Europe are equally problematic as well. Homelessness in Europe has increased significantly since 2010 by at least 70%. The 8th overview on housing exclusion in Europe done by Fianza, published in September 2023, estimates that at least 895,000 persons live in Europe who are actually homeless according to their definition. So the problems are very serious in developing countries, which, as the minister from Uganda pointed out, take a very different dimension, including inadequate housing due to large numbers of people living in informal settlements. If we count all of them as homeless, according to, say, ethos light definition, we are really talking about a gargantuan problem, which it is. But despite all these numbers, I feel like sometimes the conversation of homelessness is misdirected, because we often talk about homelessness as a crisis. In my view, homelessness is a problem. It's not a crisis. The real crisis is affordable housing. We are not able to ensure affordable housing, and we are not able to make sure that people have access to a safe and dignified home. And instead, we talk about the manifestation or the consequence of this failure, which is basically what happens when people become homeless. Homelessness, in other words, is a consequence, not the cause. There is a homelessness problem, but there is a housing crisis. Let's not get both these things mixed up. So in my report to the UN recently on affordable housing crisis, I pointed this out very clearly, that homelessness, of course, should be tackled through a variety of measures. I'm very glad to see, especially Housing First, as a very promising approach, especially suitable for wealthy countries. Now, of course, it's more challenging if you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, living in informal settlements, and then Housing First could be a real problem. Because as Austria knows and as Finland knows, Finland also successfully adopted Housing First to drive down homelessness from about 17,000 persons in 1987 to about 3,000 people now, an 83% drop. It's a very successful number, but let's not compare the numbers. Let me not even get started with how large the numbers are in many other countries of the global south. Housing First would be a very challenging approach for resource-stressed countries on their own. On the other hand, there are many issues. If we change the conversation from homelessness to talking about, affordable housing crisis, then we can start identifying structural things that even countries in the global south or countries that are less resourced, but in the global north. For example, a number of smaller European countries don't have that kind of money to pull off Housing First. But it's possible to address some structural factors. What are those factors? Well, let me quickly run through 5 of them. First is this mistaken belief that markets will supply housing. That markets, unfortunately, have only their own interests in mind. They take care of themselves, but they don't care about housing. So this mistaken belief, unfortunately, has become more and more solidified since the 1980s. And this has got to be reversed. It's a change in political vision. The extreme manifestation of this blind belief in markets is a current last decade or more, the trend towards financialization of housing, seeing housing purely as a commodity, not as a human right. The second factor, structural factor, is the reversal of social housing or public support for housing, including in developing countries, unfortunately. I mean, I come from India where systematic investment in public housing used to be a major part of approaches to housing for the poor in the 70s and 80s. Unfortunately, since the 90s, due to, again, a mistaken belief in neoliberalism, this has been reversed. The third issue is land. I can tell you that I have not been able to see any country or city which has been able to ensure affordable housing without control over land as a speculative asset. If you take a hyper-capitalized country like Singapore, more than 85% of the land is in the hands of the government and housing. But if you take, say, San Diego, I was recently in San Diego, I'll mention those numbers, because it's scarily the reverse. 82% of the land is zoned for private ownership. It's exactly the opposite of the Singapore model. And then should we be surprised that there is no affordable housing in San Diego and homelessness is increasing? Fourth issue is wage stagnation and inflation. Oddly enough, both should not coexist according to macroeconomics, but they both exist, unfortunately. And we have to ask some hard questions about how is it that wages are stagnating and at the same time inflation is going up, right? It's a larger conversation. The fourth issue, which is where I'll conclude, is legal issues are very important in terms of both prevention and response. Unfortunately, although in many countries housing is mentioned as something to be protected in the Constitution, unfortunately, that's not the same thing as protecting it as a right to housing. It's often mentioned as a policy goal or an aspiration or a directive principle of state policy, but not more than that. There is a need to constitutionalize the right to housing. There is also a need to establish better legal protections for renters, including better eviction prevention. Most countries have very poor or antiquated laws when it comes to evictions. And some of these legal measures will come in very useful as a way to sort of deal with not the root causes of how to produce affordable housing, but to mitigate the negative effects of what happens when you don't have enough affordable housing. So people won't end up systematically on the streets. So I'll just conclude on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Special Rapporteur, for your statements. Thank you also for linking homelessness to housing the way you did it, framing homelessness more or less only as a problem and focusing on housing as there is a housing crisis, a crisis of affordable housing. Thank you for this. Another UN entity that is very engaged in the housing sector is UN Habitat. The United Nations Human Settlements Program works in over 90 countries to promote transformative change in cities and human settlements through knowledge, policy advice, technical assistance, and collaborative action. Please welcome Madame de Ferrari. She works as a program management officer at UN Habitat. Prior to this, she worked with UNICEF as a specialist on water, sanitation, hygiene, and education. Madame de Ferrari, could you share experiences from your projects with us?
Distinguished delegate, ladies, gentlemen, friends, and colleagues, my sincere appreciation goes to the Austrian Ministry of Social Affairs, Health, Care, and Consumer Protection, and the Austrian Permanent Representation for facilitating this critical dialogue, preventing housing measures to end homelessness. Since its foundation, UN Habitat has worked to promote affordable, safe, and adequate housing for all, as one of the transformative forces that can lead the work to overcome challenges related to poverty, climate change, exclusion, and inequality. Housing beyond four walls and a roof is a cornerstone for economic inclusion, digital access, safety, and healthy environment. As the agency promoting socially and environmentally sustainable cities, UN Habitat emphasizes that ending homelessness, therefore, goes beyond emergency assistance. It demands long-term solutions intertwined with eradicating poverty and ensuring universal access to adequate, affordable, and safe housing. The Secretary General's report on inclusive policy and program to address homelessness, developed by UN Habitat in cooperation with DESA last year, provides a comprehensive overview of existing intervention and critical areas for improvement. For example, emergency responses are crucial, but often prioritize short-term solutions, overlooking long-term needs. We advocate a shift towards viewing homelessness as a structural issue, emphasizing prevention and right-based strategies. Social protection, housing policy, slum upgrading are instrumental in addressing the root cause and structural factors contributing to homelessness. Preventive measures, both universal and targeted, have gained prominence in local and national strategies. Examples from Norway and Finland and Austria prove the effectiveness of social and public housing expansion. Unfortunately, framework to prevent eviction, a leading cause of homelessness, remain limited. Successful models such as Newcastle homelessness strategy show reduction in eviction through a dedication unit and collaboration between court, public welfare bodies, and public and private housing providers, enforcing the prohibition on forced eviction, especially in informal settlement, is also crucial. Housing first strategies prioritizing people's primary needs for permanent housing and ongoing support services are providing effective globally. The report also emphasizes that addressing homelessness in developing countries requires a shift in focus, favoring in situ participatory upgrading of poor quality housing, recognizing economic needs and supporting vulnerable population. A successful example is provided by the Thai Community Organization Development Institute, CODI, by establishing city committee to negotiate for land and support the upgrading of informal neighborhood. CODI has secured housing for around 104,000 urban poor families in more than 300 cities. Civil society organizations, religious institutions, and community groups should be recognized as the full partners by governments as they provide vital resources and support, helping people experiencing homelessness and extreme exclusion to regain trust and gradually improve their situation. Finally, the SG report highlights the need to scale up intergovernmental efforts and to utilize the intergovernmental working group on housing called for in the UN Habitat Resolution on Adequate Housing for All. While housing alone cannot end homelessness, addressing housing exclusion, especially for marginalized groups, is critical to break the cycle of poverty and exclusion. Together, we can create a more equitable world, ensuring everyone has the opportunity to live with dignity. Thank you.
Madame de Ferrari, thank you for these very interesting insights and focusing and stressing homelessness as a prior structural issue, on focusing as well on housing exclusion and the need to implement programs preventing evictions. Thank you. On our route to ending homelessness, eradicating poverty, and providing affordable housing, we are now heading back to Europe. On EU level, FEANZA, the European Federation of National Organizations working with the homeless, has a very particular role regarding policy work on housing and homelessness. I'm pleased to welcome FEANZA's Deputy Director, Ruth Owen, who is joining us online from Brussels. She has extensive experience in European affairs, network development, and strategic planning on EU level. Mrs. Owen, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Let me add my thanks to the UN Commission for Social Development and to Austria for organising this important event. Thanks to the chair and to all of the previous speakers. I also take the opportunity to congratulate the Commission for its excellent report on affordable housing and social protection systems for all to end homelessness. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to address you on behalf of FEANZA today. As we've heard, all states need to address homelessness to reach the SDGs, in particular goals 1 and 11, and to deliver on their commitment to leave no one behind. While the scope of the problem differs from between countries, homelessness is proof that extreme poverty is a reality in all states, including the wealthiest. In 2021, the European Union launched a European platform on combating homelessness, whereby all EU member states committed to ending homelessness and to making significant progress by 2030. I want to stress that we're currently a long way from ending homelessness in most countries. In fact, we're getting further away. Homelessness has surged significantly across most European countries in recent years, and this is driven, as we've heard, by spiralling housing costs, which have long outstripped income growth and which states have done too little to effectively address. As we heard from the Special Rapporteur, at least 895,000 people sleep rough or stay in homeless accommodation in the European Union every night. Several million will experience some form of homelessness over a year. Homelessness affects all ages, all genders. And in European member states, about a third of people staying in homeless accommodation are children. But we know that effective public policy can reduce homelessness. Homelessness has decreased in Denmark, Finland, and Austria in recent years. This seems at least in part to be down to ambitious homelessness policies and to the deployment of Housing First at scale. Housing First is undoubtedly an important part of the toolkit for ending homelessness. The evidence that it works is overwhelming. As we've heard from Austria, it's a humane and effective response to homelessness, especially for very vulnerable and excluded people who need ongoing support as well as housing. However, it's not a magic bullet and it can't end homelessness alone. As the Commission's report points out, adequate social protection systems and housing policies are essential ingredients. The countries that are doing the best on homelessness have significant stocks of social housing. Importantly, they only manage to start reducing homelessness once they explicitly mobilize that precious resource to rehouse homeless people through Housing First. And I think that's a really key part of the discussion today. Ending homelessness requires the mobilization of policies beyond housing and social protection. I'm thinking of migration and health as two of the most important. And it also means having specific measures to reach those who are especially vulnerable because of disability, age, gender, orientation, race, ethnicity, or other factors. I think a really important part of ending homelessness is making it an explicit goal of public policy. Too often we're focused on managing homelessness, and we need to make the resources available to deliver on that ambition. Ending homelessness requires effective prevention as well as rehousing. As we've heard, Austria is an inspiration on that front. Prevention also goes beyond eviction. States are woefully inadequate in general when it comes to blocking established pathways into homelessness, like discharge from state care, prison, or hospital. I agree with the Special Rapporteur that homelessness is a consequence of the broader housing crisis and that we need to tackle the structural drivers. However, I would emphasize that human rights compel us to focus on the most egregious violations of rights, and Fiance's experience is that when homelessness is not a specific target of urgent measures, homeless people are often overlooked. The human rights case for ending homelessness is overwhelming. The available evidence suggests that it's possible, and indeed we know quite a lot about how to go about achieving it. Housing First is very effective intervention and can be a big part of the answer. I think the biggest question is whether we have the political will to end homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Owen, for your statement. So now we know there is room for effective public policy to reduce homelessness, and it will need a more clear-cut emphasis on housing as a human right and a more emphasis on mobilizing housing, social housing for ending homelessness. Thank you for your statement. I may now open the floor for the discussion. Please take advantage of having our great guests here and ask questions, give comments. We have about 25 minutes for the discussion, and I invite you now to give your statements. Thank you for using the mic. Thanks.
My name is Dr. Ifi Ofong. I represent the NGO working group to end homelessness. There are a couple of us in this room, and we are so excited that Austria and the allies are putting together this event. Our own event is coming up on Thursday by 1:15 p.m. in Conference Room A. We're also going to be talking quite a lot about homelessness. And one thing that interests me from all the presentation, the first thing is that, like she said, the youth person said, is the political will. The political will to tackle homelessness. And then from the speakers on the podium, it is very clear that ending homelessness is not one size fits all. Because homelessness, displays itself in various forms and shapes, from Africa to Asia to Europe and all that. So my comment here is this. I like the conversation that we're having now, and we have to keep the momentum going. The second thing is that homelessness, like I also heard, is not a housing problem thing per se, or rather it's a housing problem thing per se, and it's not really what a social welfare person can tackle. For us in Africa, land is the key issue. Land is a key issue, because a lot of people are homeless because they do not have access to land. We are going to be talking about that also in our event on Wednesday. So the good thing, like I said, is that we're having this conversation, and that we have to keep the momentum going and see how we can solve this homelessness problem based on regional peculiarities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. there's another speaker.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. My name is Sofia Garcia, and I'm the representative to the UN of SOS Children's Villages, or because of the Austrian colleagues, SOS Kinderdorf in German. Thank you very much for convening this very important conversation. I would like to make a quick comment and a question from our perspective. The perspective of SOS Children's Villages is the perspective of children, right? And we work with families that are at risk of separation or children that have lost parental care on providing first and foremost a home to live in. And we really very much understand the short-term but also long-term and the direct but also indirect impact of the policies that have been presented here today. For everybody, having a home and having a house to live in is important, but for children is beyond. A home is beyond a house, is the root for stability, is a measure of security to grow and to develop. And so for families with children, these housing policies are really, really, really impactful, again, in the short and longer term, in the very development of the child. And the second aspect is the aspect of young people. It has been said by almost all panelists, the topic of discrimination. We work with young people that come, that live in vulnerable families or that come from traumatic childhood and background, and or that have not lived with their biological families, and they experience extreme discrimination when finding a home. So I was wondering if there is any examples or anything else you could add, any of the panelists, on specific policies and the specificities that need to be taken into account, and how can we prioritize policies for families with small children in access to housing and young people in difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Does any one of the speakers want to react on this? Thank you.
10 days ago, I was in San Diego on a semi-official visit to assess the homelessness situation there. As you know, California is the epicenter of the homelessness crisis in the United States, and San Diego is one of those cities very seriously affected. One of the inspirational things that have been done on the positive side that I saw there is a school called Monarch School. You can actually Google and find out. Monarch School basically caters only to homeless children. And the reason it struck me was that it actually admits only children whose parents and the children themselves are homeless. So oddly enough, you might think that that is not what we've been told, because essentially the belief is that that creates a kind of a segregation, a kind of a stigmatization issue. The school might be known as Homeless Children's School, or if you graduate from there, you know, what are the prospects of that kid making it in life, etc. But actually, oddly enough, it's actually one of the most successful examples of catering to homeless children, both in terms of retention, how many actually drop out, graduation rates, which are actually more than 10 percentage points higher than the surrounding best performing public schools, and job training and placement in particular schools as well for further studies. It's a very interesting and challenging example because it goes counter to a lot of what the way we think about things. And I always like things that push us to think outside the box. And I think that it tells us something that maybe we need to also revisit some of the assumptions that we have about how to organize the different services, including education, job support, medical provisioning services, critical issues that are actually closely tied to, if not entirely dependent on, housing and location. Where you live, what you have access to, entirely depends on where you live. And I think that it's well worth kind of studying examples like these. And I'd be curious to see if people around the room have heard of similar examples.
On the issue of of the youth in the context of probably Africa, most of the young people cannot afford housing because they either are not in jobs yet, or they lack the social aspect of getting housing. In the context of Uganda, we look at it at addressing the job space for the youth. So we have what we call the Graduate Volunteer Scheme. My ministry runs this program with the corporate organizations like telecommunications company, the Coca-Cola, the distilling companies. So big companies and investors profile for us jobs that we give to youth who are graduating. And then at the ministry, we'll pay for the youth accommodation, transport to that job, and give you up to 1 year to be able to prove yourself to those organizations. And if after 1 year they do not admit you, because they will only give us jobs that they would like them to train and take over the job. So we pay for 1 year as government for their accommodation, for their transport, and then after a year, some people even after 6 months, the company will absorb them and employ them. So for housing for the youth, the major issue is the income. Do you have the income to rent? Do you have the income to get mortgage to buy your own apartment? So on the side of the apartment, we work with social cooperatives to undertake development of affordable apartments of 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. So in such circumstance, we even agree with them. We give these cooperatives and companies cheap capital from government so that they develop cheap and affordable housing of 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms for young families. And in that context, in most circumstances, then they will be able to have their money, which is employing them, but also have the housing which is affordable. So that's the model that we are using in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Amonge, for sharing this very inspiring example with us. Maybe there are other countries, other examples how to tackle the problem with practical solutions that work out well. Is anyone? Thank you. Please.
I'm Marianne D'Antuono. I'm a NGO representative of the International Association of Charities and also a member of the working group to end homelessness. And I don't have a specific example to offer, but I guess my concern is twofold. One is working on a global level, and this came up several times in the presentation, is that countries define homelessness in a different way. And it seems for us as a group, the working group, that we've encountered this throughout our conversations here since CSocD first entertained the notion of homelessness in the 58th session. And I'm wondering if we have made any progress moving beyond this description to having countries adopt it. I think it would be very important, because once we have a description of homelessness or a definition of homelessness, then really we can move into measurement and see what kind of a problem homelessness really is. Because the number of people who lack access to housing, who are excluded from housing as a result of discrimination, is extraordinary. It's almost mind-boggling. And I guess if we're really going to get political will, we first have to face the issue. So I'm just kind of curious if the Special Rapporteur or if Ms. Ferrari, if we've made any progress in that arena.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your statement. I'm sorry that I don't see Madame Owen on the screen. Maybe she's also one wanting to comment on this issue. So maybe I invite you to give a statement now, and then you can take the floor as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, I think it's very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all international definition of homelessness. I think probably the best attempt that we've had so far is this European typology of homelessness and housing exclusion, which has the advantage of addressing a whole variety of living situations that mean that you don't have a home, which means not having the physical, social, and legal dimensions of a home. So, like having a tenancy, having adequate physical space for your needs, and having like the privacy that we all need in a home. And it's true that if you apply the ethos definition internationally, homelessness is, as the Special Rapporteur said earlier, a very, very big problem. But I personally think that that is a reality. And I think you can always isolate different bits of the typology for different purposes, but understanding homelessness as a process of exclusion that covers a wide variety of situations seems to me kind of the bedrock of effective policies to address it. And I wanted to say that maybe in the UN sense, like the census has made occasional attempts to enumerate homelessness, not very successful in the last round because most states couldn't isolate, although they were supposed to make an effort to capture homeless people. I think that will be slightly improved in the data coming out of the last census, but it will inevitably be imperfect and leave lots of gaps.
Thank you. Thank you. Madame de Ferrari, Mr. Rajagopal, do you want to add something to this? Yeah.
Talking about the definition is something that we are working towards with the resolution on inclusive policy and program to address homelessness. I mentioned in my speech that we did the report last year that was the consequence of the first ever resolution in the third committee to address homelessness. And in the report, we put forward some indicators to help the member states to reach consensus on a definition. In 2023, probably because the member state didn't feel that we were able to collect enough material and input from member states, they decided just to ask for a second report, more detailed. So we are now already working, and in 2025 we'll do a report, and we invite all member states and hopefully Austria maybe also to endorse and sponsor the resolution. And we will gather information, we will come up with stronger indicators, and hopefully with the next discussion and negotiation of the next resolution, we will come closer to a global definition. As the colleague was saying, it is true that it's very hard to give a definition for all these different situations in the world, but at the same time, if we want to talk about the topics without definition, we cannot measure it, we cannot see the improvement. Every member states can, every country can define and give a different statistic, so it's very important to have a definition for all. And if I may, I would also like to answer to the children point, because housing first your initiative or what we can see in UK, it's a preventive measure. And preventive measure, it means that the children are the ones that are going to gain from it, because we already seen that investment in shelter, investment in very short solution are extremely expensive compared to housing first. And when you have housing first, it means that you have a household. If you have a household, you have the children that are protected and they are not separated from the family. That is the worst that can happen for the stability of a child. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that progress and innovation is on its way according to the definition of homelessness. And thank you.
So I was on the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Secretary General's report on homelessness, and the issue of definition came very, very briefly, just briefly, but didn't really go anywhere. I'm in two minds about whether it's useful to have, let alone the question of whether it's possible, but the question of whether it's useful to have a definition of homelessness that is global, in the sense in which, for example, having a definition of poverty, we can ask whether it's been useful or not, whether it's really contributed to more accurate measurement and more effective policies to tackle poverty, or have we not made much progress? And my sense is that I don't think we have made much progress with poverty. At least the failure to address poverty is not the result of lack of definition. It's got nothing to do with that. So let's not get over-obsessed about definitions. What's more important is that we are able to evaluate rigorously whatever goes by the name of homelessness, whether it's a ethos light definition in Europe or more restricted definitions in a variety of different contexts. We have a set of criteria by which we can assess whether those homelessness policies are complying with human rights. And there we have much more specificity. We can develop very concrete measures and indicators by which we can see, for example, if particular criteria such as affordability or access or security of tenure are actually adequately protected, no matter what the context is. I think it's more important that from a human rights perspective, we have robust acceptance of those kinds of criteria rather than trying to get into a definitional approach itself. So at least that's, to me, seems like I'm not convinced that it's important to dedicate a huge amount of resources and time to defining homelessness at the global level.
Thank you. There are some more minutes to go.
Of the EGM, in Nairobi in 2019, and we did come up with what we can call description of homelessness. So I don't know if, because I honestly speaking, I quite agree, with you. Can't we now use that? Because once we have an acceptable, call it description of homelessness, that way we can now go ahead and carry out measurements. But right now that we don't have an agreed description or definition, it makes it a little bit, not easy, for us to say, yes, this person is homeless, this person is not homeless. So I am still feeling that is what we came up with in 2019, during the EGM in Nairobi. And I think if you really look at that description, I think it's something that we can all agree with and work with. So I don't know, whether we are going to continue to wait until we're able to have an agreed definition, whereas the EGM came up with something that, as far as I'm concerned, is workable. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll leave this specific topic here now for the moment. I'm asking for some other comments.
I guess, of course, there might be a lot of different kinds of homelessness, and it's another topic in Africa, because you talk about land is our problem. And it's different if you're living in the European Union or in Asia or otherwhere on the world. But I guess the same problem we all have is that if we want to fight against homelessness, we need a little bit of money and a little bit of law. And I guess one of the problems, especially in the European Union, and the member states of the European Union, is so we're in a situation our budgets are under pressure due to COVID, due to the crisis, inflation, and all that stuff. And now we have a debate balancing finance rules against social investments. And it's the battleground, actually, in the European Union. And we as social ministers, we are talking about investments, because anytime you're building buildings, railroads, houses, you're talking about investments. And in any time you have social costs and health system, care, everybody's talking about costs. And we have to talk about investments too. There are investments in our future, investments in our solidarity, in our democracy. And it's a very important battleground, I guess, between these two worlds. The financial world and the fiscal rules, on the other hand, and the world struggling, fighting against poverty, against homelessness, for a good health system, a care system. And we need to make it very clear we are talking about investments, not about costs. And in the near future, in March, we have a meeting together, the Ministers of Finance and the Ministers of Social Affairs in Brussels, and it will be a very interesting debate about how about balancing these two worlds. And I guess if we want to be successful fighting against homelessness, fighting against poverty, we have to discuss that. You mentioned very clear. We didn't have a problem of what do you say about homelessness? We have a problem of affordable houses. That's the stuff we have to discuss, and very clear, because otherwise in the we'll lose a lot of children on our way.
Thank you, Minister Rauch. So I want to thank you as the speakers here on the panel, and I want to thank you in the audience for this very inspiring debate. I personally, I can take away a lot from the discussion. Thank you. Let me now introduce the permanent representative of Austria to the United Nations, Mr. Alexander Marschik. He has previously held the positions of Director General for International Affairs and Political Director, as well as serving as Ambassador to the Political and Security Committee of the European Union in Brussels. Can we please have your final remarks? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Hammer. Thank you, ministers, excellencies, dear guests. I'll be very brief. It's been a great pleasure to be here and to see you here. We heard that as an ever bigger share of the global population lives in cities, sustainable and affordable housing is an immensely important topic. And we heard a lot about the current crises which overlap, reinforce each other, whether it's energy, food, and prices of housing that have risen around the world, inflation that's causing hardship for many people, and in particular those with low incomes. Formats like the ones that we had today, this meeting space here, give us the opportunity to share experiences from different countries, from different contexts, different perspectives, to broaden horizons and to also feel inspired. Then we can find innovative approaches and solutions to know how best to address the housing crisis, the homelessness problem, and all related issues as well. I have to say for myself, I learned a lot today. I learned about the implementation of the Housing First approach and the Wohnschirm, the housing umbrella in Austria from Minister Rauch and from Ms. Hammer. I learned about recent developments and policies in place in Uganda from Minister Amongi. Received a very interesting overview about the global challenges, the global situation from UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, Mr. Rajagopal. We got insights from UN projects from Mr. Ferrari, from the UN Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, and we also heard about efforts at the European Union level from the Deputy Director of FEANZA, Ms. Owen, and a reminder also about the need for political will. Especially interesting also, I found the discussion, and I want to thank everyone for participating in that. We learned about the incredible importance these questions have, in particular also for children and youth, the relevance of land, of jobs and income, political will, but also financial investments that are needed in this area. I think whether we find a uniform definition of homelessness or not, I think what I took with me also, there is a clear need for reliable data, for clear information about the problem. There's also a clear need for cooperation and collaboration, and that with the inclusion of all stakeholders. Conferences like the CSocD are particularly enriching and helpful in this respect. They bring everyone together, and I really want to thank everyone for participating here in this discussion. Let's leave today with a commitment of working together to ensure housing for everyone, to leave no one behind. If the UN is all of our house, all of our home, no one should be homeless. Thank you very much for your participation, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.